Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In today's story, Opie found out his wife cheated on him after he caught his wife trying to sneak her affair partner into their house. He then confronted the affair partner and things escalated quickly. Little does the wife know that he has been recording and writing down everything she has been doing with her affair partner to set himself up for nice revenge when they go to court. Let's get into the story. She cheated. I'm figuring it out, and it hurts. Hello everyone, I, 34 male, found my wife, 33 female, in our bed with another man. A little background. For the sake of my sanity, I will refer to my wife as Ellie. My best friend's name is Omar, not real names. Ellie and I met in college and hit it off right away. When we started dating, I was not really assertive. You could accurately say that it was her showing interest and desire in me that made me really begin to value myself and work past a ton of insecurities I used to deal with. I was just a hardworking, nerdy, smart dude, but had never had any real luck with women. To me, it was almost incredible that someone as smart and beautiful as her would show as much interest in me as I showed in her. We both have always been driven, which led us separately building small businesses of our own by the time we graduated college. We moved in together after graduation and a year later, married. We had, what I considered, a very strong marriage. We had weathered family tragedies, professional challenges, small and large disagreements, and always managed to work through everything, and I felt it always made us stronger. Ellie has always had a huge social circle that included a fair number of men, but I never thought too much about it, as she never did anything that raised flags, since all social outings seemed to always be as a large mixed group, and I came to trust her closest friends. As our 10-year anniversary was coming up, I decided to bring up the topic of starting a family. Early on in the relationship, we had together decided to compromise on the size of our family. I wanted kids, she wanted none or at most one. So we agreed on having one. Now, 10 years into our marriage, secure economically, and thinking how healthy I thought our relationship was, I brought the topic up. I can't help but think me doing this may have started this whole chain of events. A little over 3 months ago, she tells me she is going out with her friends to have some fun. She basically told me she needed to unwind, as she was getting stressed about me asking about having kids again. That night, she comes back at 4 a.m. Starting with that day, our bedroom goes completely dead. In our relationship, Ellie has always initiated as much as me. In fact, on average, I would say more often than me, and for rare periods when we were dealing with traveling, I can't think of us ever going more than 5 days without some form of intimacy. She starts going out more, guarding her phone, avoiding me. All this, stuff I had never seen from her before. After about 3 to 4 weeks of this, I talk to Omar, my best friend, and he points me to Reddit, and I start reading. Eventually, I decide I need to do something about this, as it's beginning to put me in a bad mood. I don't just want to trust her, I like to trust my wife. I need to trust her. Well, needless to say, I get my hands on her phone and check her calls and texts, feeling like a complete monster violating her privacy. Turns out that one of the people new to our social circle is an old high school flame from before we were together. The more I dug, the more I found. I think the fact I'd always trusted her completely made her complacent about hiding the affair better. I found out that during that party a month before he had attended, and they spent all night catching up and ended up kissing, not even really hiding it from her whole group of friends and then conveniently going to the bathroom at the same time. Up to this point, all I had felt has been this giant pit of anxiety in my stomach, a part of me trying to hold on to the image of the woman I thought I had married, a kind of self-delusion. But the anger and sadness start getting overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she seems oblivious to my sudden indifference. She didn't notice. I had stopped making romantic gestures. I felt like I was breaking inside. Finally, a month ago, I decided to catch them in the act, and I tell Ellie I'm going to visit my cousin for the weekend. He lives 3 hours away, but instead I go stay with Omar, who has been helping me record and copy everything. I waited, and sure enough, she brought him to our house, to our bed. I snuck in the house and made my way to our room, and the sounds left no doubts. They were so into it, they didn't notice me standing there at the door recording them with my phone. I literally felt something in me break, like something in my soul snapped so hard I could hear it. My veins went ice cold, and something like a 10-ton anvil had been dropped on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I went numb. The next part one can only tell you what Omar says happened, because I only remember parts of the next few minutes. According to Omar, who I had brought as a witness, apparently I walked up to them, pulled that guy off of the bed, and Omar pulled me off of him. I remember Omar holding me down on the ground. After that, there was the normal hysterics of being caught. I went no contact for 5 weeks and began working with a lawyer, preparing for the worst. Omar served as her contact point during that time, since I simply didn't want to talk to her. I only contacted my family and told them that we were having problems. After the 5 weeks of no contact, we met and talked. She was remorseful, told me it wasn't my fault, that it was all her doing, her responsibility and her decisions. We decided to go to marriage counseling and at least explore if there is anything salvageable. Sitting here, I can't believe that even after that, I still love her. I'm disgusted with myself that I have thought about her well-being, about her happiness. I especially hate that now I have to question our entire relationship. Was it just now that she got brazen about cheating, or has it happened before and I didn't bother looking far enough, or was too stupidly trusting to see it at all? It's now been almost a month since deciding to try marriage counseling, and my questions to those who have already gone through this are the following. 1. Is it possible to reconcile without feeling that you lose some self-respect? 2. How long does the anger to sadness to numbness, rinse and repeat cycle last? I'm getting exhausted at the constant emotional roller coaster. 3. I find myself really loathing the whole idea of having to essentially be on the constant lookout. Is that a sign of me wanting out, or just me being exhausted because I honestly can't tell? I'll take any advice, honestly. I love her. I've been head over heels for her since we met back in college. I want to work it out. Is it actually possible? And if it is, will it ever resemble what it used to be even remotely? TLDR, wife cheated, trying to reconcile but have a lot of fears and questions. After reading everyone's replies and the messages, I took the weekend to let it all sink in and harden my resolve. I came to the conclusion that I was never going to be able to live with myself if I stayed with her. Staying and working on it would mean having to sacrifice a significant portion of my self-respect. I also realized that I want no part of a relationship that would require me to be in a state of constant vigilance for signs of betrayal. So I decided to push the proverbial red button and nuke it all. Here's how it all went down. Monday, I woke up early to an unexpected surprise. When I opened my eyes, my Johnson was greeting me at full attention. Guys, I can't stress how surprising that was to me, considering that since finding out about Ellie's affair, I had not had morning wood. It was like my body was saying, hell yeah, we are going to get this done today and be done. Ready for something new? I actually laughed so hard at seeing it that Omar and his wife came to check in on me thinking I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I got up, got ready, and called Ellie's dad and told him we needed to talk. I met with him about an hour before our marriage counseling. The whole drive there I was surprised at how calm I was about it. I could still feel an ocean of emotion somewhere deep down, but on the surface, I was not feeling anything. We met up at a little mom and pop breakfast place near his house and we sat down. Ellie's dad is a good man, lighthearted and funny, but more importantly, he is level-headed. I thanked him for how he and his wife had treated me all these years and told him I was sorry to have this talk with him. He listened patiently, but as I started telling him why I was going to be divorcing his daughter, he lowered his head. I could tell he was ashamed and angry, not at me, but at Ellie. He told me he understood, and I asked him to not tell Ellie as I was going to be telling her within the hour. He agreed, we shook hands, and then he told me to take care. I hated having to shatter his image of her. I debated with myself if I should have asked him to care for her, but I shouted down that instinct because he is her dad. Of course he will care for her, but also it is no longer my business to care for her. She is a big girl. Next, I went to our scheduled marriage and counseling session. I had been rehearsing all day Sunday what I would say to her and how I would say it. I wanted to essentially emotion-prove my actions and words for the next few hours. I sat there in the parking lot for 10 minutes and just prayed. I hadn't felt like I wanted to or could since all this started. When we sat down for marriage counseling, Ellie was wearing one of the dresses I loved her in, and for a split second, I forgot everything. But then the visceral disgust and anger I felt pushed the attraction completely out. I let the counselor get things going like our previous sessions, and after about 10 minutes of her and Ellie talking, I interrupted. This is how it went. Excuse me, I have a few things I need to say to Ellie, and that I wanted to be able to say here with a neutral third party. If at any point I am interrupted, I will simply leave, and that's that. Ellie, I have come to realize I do not need to know if this was the only time you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how long it went for. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how many times you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know why. Even if there was a good reason, a perfectly why, it also would not matter. The only thing that matters is that you did. I know now the only facts that matter. You were never going to have children with me. At this, Ellie opens her mouth to interject, and I started walking to the door, so she immediately backed off. You were going to string me along for however it would take. You were going to cheat on me sooner or later. This is when the waterworks started to open up for her. You do not respect me or love me. The counselor begins to look like she is about to interject, and I respond by taking another step toward the door, which ends that. My lawyer is filing for divorce as we sit here, and as of about an hour ago, your father knows the entire truth of what has been going on. Do not contact me. From here on out, the only person we will communicate through are lawyers. These are the last words we will ever exchange. Goodbye. I walked the last few steps to the door and walked out. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a wail, the likes of which would haunt people's dreams. She scrambled out of the office pursuing me and tried to stop me, telling me how sorry she is and how we can start a family and to give her a second chance, and she cried hysterically throughout. I pushed past her and got in my car and left. At this point, that ocean of emotions that had been quietly hiding underneath it all started roiling, and I was barely holding it in. I drove to my parents' house and sent the text message I had planned to Ellie's best friend's husband. When I got home, my old man was at the store, but Mom could tell I wasn't well. She has always been able to read me like a book. I told her I needed to tell her and Dad something important, and we sat down and waited. At this point, I have to thank Responsible Mode 114 for messaging me, which added, and he totally calmed me down. About 30 minutes later, Dad arrived. I poured it all out. The more I talked, the more I felt that ocean of emotions emptying and all that pain pouring out of me. When I finished talking to my dad, he just held me as I cried into his shirt for a solid 20 minutes. When it all ended, I felt spent and oddly at peace. I have arranged for Omar to receive a Harley he has been eyeing for a while. He has been more than a friend to me, and I'm going to try my best to be as good a friend to him as he has been to me. I can't wait to see his face. I think this is the last time I will post, as it should be the end of this story. I just want to thank you all. Would have never thought that I would find sound and sane advice from strangers on the internet. I know that it will be a long road ahead, that I will still need individual counseling to deal with the aftershocks of this debacle and rebuild my ability to trust. I have to hope that little by little, all this pain and sadness and anger will go away. Like Roto-Rooter for my soul, if I do the work. Now begins the rest of my life, and I can honestly say I am looking forward to it. Wow, OP, the way you handled the situation was outstanding. Kudos to you. You dropped the bomb right in the middle of your counseling session with her, which is even more epic. The good thing is that now the worst days are behind you, and from here on out, it will get better. As you mentioned, your wife simply wanted her cake and to eat it too, which explains why she came crying and chasing after you like a lost puppy after you told her your intentions. Best of luck to you in the future, OP. Let's see what the comments had to say about this situation. ArmorTeague227 said, "My dude, you handled yourself like a boss and with class and self-control, and not only confronting her at marriage counseling, but taking the initiative and holding her accountable not only to her cheating, but that she no longer would hostage your heart and soul. And in the very place where many in your position as a man the narrative would spin in her favor, you took control not only from your ex but the therapist as well. This was your true therapy. You took the steps in reclaiming your life back. I couldn't be more proud, my man. I know it hurts right now because taking down that wall when crumbling is draining, but you will survive this. You will rebuild to be something new, stronger, more powerful, and I guarantee you this is the moment where your life begins again. Congrats to you, man. It might not feel like a victory, but you have just laid the gauntlet down for a better world than yourself, brick by brick. After being married for 7 years, my wife's infidelity shattered our once wonderful marriage. I'm a 40-year-old man, while my wife is a 41-year-old woman. Throughout our relationship, she had been an incredible source of tranquility, always knowing how to keep me content and happy. However, my struggle with anger management posed significant challenges in the early stages of our marriage. During our outings to bars or restaurants, I would often react aggressively if I perceived someone staring at my wife, resorting to physical altercations. Additionally, my possessiveness towards her was noticeable. However, a couple named Zach and Frankie arrived in our neighborhood a few years ago, bringing with them a refreshing sense of friendliness and warmth. As our friendship with Zach and Frankie blossomed, my wife, Taylor, started including them in our social gatherings, be it dinners or parties. In return, they reciprocated the gesture by inviting us to their anniversaries and other significant events. When my birthday came around, Taylor decided to invite a special group of friends, including our new neighbors, Zach and Frankie, to celebrate with me. Their thoughtful gift of a laptop meant a great deal to me, as they were aware that my previous one had recently stopped working. I felt genuinely grateful for their kind gesture. As the evening progressed, most of our guests had departed early, leaving only Zach and Frankie behind. Given their proximity as neighbors, they had the convenience of returning home at midnight. We continued to enjoy ourselves, sipping wine, watching TV, while Frankie and my wife, Taylor, engaged in conversation in the kitchen. It was during this casual setting that Zach complimented my wife's beauty, noticing her elegance as she wore her nightie. After the departure of our other guests, Zach remained unaware of my possessiveness towards my wife. When I confronted him about his earlier comment, he naively reiterated that my wife was exceptionally attractive and expressed a wish to have met her during his single days. His response ignited a powerful surge of anger within me, escalating rapidly into fury. Without hesitation, I lashed out and struck him in the face, swiftly ejecting him from my house. As blood trickled down Zach's face, the severity of the situation became apparent to Taylor and Frankie, leaving them deeply terrified. Despite my previous friendly demeanor towards Zach, when someone crossed a certain boundary, I found it impossible to restrain myself. Following that incident, Zach and Frankie ceased visiting our home and were explicitly prohibited from doing so in the future. Several months following that incident, Zach and Frankie made the decision to relocate from the area. I experienced a sense of relief as their departure meant I would no longer have to endure their presence, which had proven challenging for me. Recognizing the impact my anger had on my wife, Taylor, who possessed an exceptional level of calmness and sensitivity, she took the proactive step of accompanying me to therapy. This was an effort to address and manage my anger issues with the ultimate goal of fostering a healthier dynamic within our relationship. I deeply appreciated my wife's unwavering support and her commitment to prioritizing my mental well-being over simply giving up on our relationship. In ordinary circumstances, I behaved like any normal individual without displaying anger. However, my protected instincts flared up whenever someone attempted to harass or mistreat my wife. Taylor comprehended that she had the freedom to dress as she pleased, as I had never imposed restrictions on her choice of clothing, and she recognized that my anger stemmed from a place of love, an intense desire to safeguard her from harm. This understanding and empathy between us helped strengthen our bond. My wife was ecstatic to witness the positive impact of my therapy sessions, observing that I was making significant progress and had successfully curbed my outbursts of anger in public. A few months down the line, we received delightful news. Taylor's sister, Katie, was engaged, and her wedding was scheduled to take place in a mere 2 months. The news filled us with immense joy, igniting our excitement as we eagerly embarked on wedding preparations, engaging in daily shopping outings to ensure everything was perfect for the upcoming celebration. Taylor had selected a lovely pink dress for herself and expressed her desire to don a matching pink coat. However, personally, I preferred not to appear overly whimsical or wear such colors, as they didn't resonate with my personal style for male attire. Instead, I opted for a white suit that felt more aligned with my preferences. As the wedding plans unfolded, Taylor's parents kindly requested our presence in their city 2 weeks prior to the big day, inviting us to participate in the preparations alongside them. Filled with anticipation and a desire to savor every moment of the upcoming wedding, we eagerly packed our belongings and embarked on a journey to Taylor's mother's house. Arriving 2 weeks prior to the joyous occasion, the sheer delight of having the entire family gathered under one roof created an atmosphere brimming with happiness and excitement. As we collectively prepared for the wedding, immersing ourselves in the various arrangements, we also found time to practice our dance moves and meticulously plan our heartfelt speeches, aiming to make the celebration truly memorable. As the wedding day approached, Taylor's relatives had gathered to celebrate the joyous occasion. Among them was Felix, an experienced event planner who had taken charge of organizing every aspect of the wedding. Due to his meticulous approach, Felix constantly sought Taylor's input, ensuring her preferences were considered in every decision made. While Felix's dedication to incorporating Taylor's opinions pleased her, it unintentionally left Katie, the bride, feeling upset. Katie felt overshadowed as Felix continued to consult Taylor regarding the card design, cake flavor, stage size, color scheme, menu selection, and more, even though it was Katie's special day. The situation grew increasingly exasperating for everyone involved, particularly Katie, as Felix seemed to rely solely on Taylor's opinion, proclaiming that nothing would proceed without her approval. Complicating matters further was the fact that Taylor had a long-standing friendship with Katie, leading Katie to consider finding a replacement for Felix. However, due to the constraints of time and the complexities involved in securing a new planner at the last minute, Katie reluctantly had to accept the situation and tolerate Felix's overpowering involvement in the wedding preparations. Katie's behavior towards everyone became increasingly bothersome as the wedding preparations intensified. When I approached her to seek her input on our dance moves, she responded with a sharp and dismissive tone, claiming to be too busy to assist. Not only did she hurl insults at those around her, but she also attributed her conduct to the stress of wedding planning, rather than offering an apology for her actions. Despite her attitude, I chose to tolerate her behavior, understanding that family support was crucial during such demanding preparations. I rationalized that these challenges were not uncommon in the midst of wedding arrangements and believed in maintaining solidarity within our family. Felix had arranged to take Taylor and Katie to select flowers for the wedding, and when Taylor invited me to join them, Katie abruptly expressed that she didn't require any additional assistance in making decisions for her special day. Although I felt a surge of frustration towards Katie, I viewed her as my younger sister and reminded myself of the importance of family support. Consequently, I decided to step back and encourage them to proceed without me, expressing that I had no desire to accompany them at that moment. Despite being aware that, as a man, my suit wouldn't overshadow the bride on her special day, Katie voiced her discontent with my white suit. She expressed a preference for no one else wearing white at her wedding. However, Taylor, being the calming influence she always was, reassured me and suggested we go shopping for a new suit at the last minute. Together, we embarked on a shopping expedition, ultimately selecting a black suit that aligned with Katie's wishes. On the day of the wedding, Taylor looked stunning in her pink dress while I donned a black coat. To my surprise, I noticed Felix wearing the exact same coat as mine. Curiosity prompted me to compliment him, remarking on our matching attire. It was then that Felix revealed that Taylor had actually gifted him the coat. In that moment, a pang of jealousy surged within me due to my possessiveness towards my wife. However, understanding that Felix held a close familial bond with Taylor as her cousin and childhood friend, I chose to set aside my feelings and dismissed any lingering sense of envy. The wedding day arrived, but unfortunately, Katie's mood was overshadowed by her constant tantrums and discontentment with various aspects of the event. Her behavior left everyone around her perplexed and concerned. My in-laws attributed her outbursts to the stress associated with wedding preparations, empathizing with her apparent struggle to cope. One particular issue arose when Katie discovered that the cake, which had been arranged by Felix based on Taylor's input, was a blueberry flavor instead of the vanilla cake she desired. This discrepancy led Katie to tears, further exacerbating the tense atmosphere. The family dynamics had become increasingly chaotic, with everyone seemingly making a mountain out of a molehill. While I understood Katie's perspective, her incessant shouting and sopping began to dampen my own spirits. In an attempt to preserve my own mood, I decided to distance myself from the bride and sought solace in the reception room. There, I engaged in enjoyable conversations with the guests, immersing myself in the joyous atmosphere. It was during one such interaction that someone inquired about Taylor's whereabouts. As their questions about Taylor arose, it dawned on me that we had yet to finish our photo shoot and had yet to rehearse our speeches. Motivated by this realization, I set out to locate Taylor. My mother-in-law informed me that she was currently in the bridal room as Katie had stepped outside. With a sense of purpose, I made my way towards the bridal room to find Taylor and discuss the remaining tasks that needed our attention. She informed me that Taylor was inside the bridal room, taking a moment to freshen up her makeup. A wave of relief washed over me, knowing that Katie's presence was absent from the room. Keen on finding Taylor and avoiding any further encounters with Katie's challenging behavior, I made my way to the dressing room. However, upon entering, I was taken aback and horrified by the sight before me. Taylor and Felix were engrossed in an intimate embrace, exchanging passionate kisses without acknowledging my presence or offering any explanation. Shocked and angered by what I witnessed, I quickly took out my phone and began recording a video as evidence. Fueled by a surge of intense emotions, I unleashed my frustration by delivering a punch to Felix's face. The commotion caught the attention of my mother-in-law, who rushed over to the dressing room upon hearing my raised voice. She was taken aback and startled to discover the unexpected situation involving Taylor and Felix. Soon after, my father-in-law arrived to help mediate and settle the dispute that had unfolded before them. Despite their pleas for me to lower my voice and avoid spoiling their daughter's wedding, I found myself unable to control my anger. Taylor, visibly upset, was in tears, caught in the midst of this tumultuous situation. The eyes of all the witnesses were fixated on this distressing scene unfolding before them. In the midst of the chaos, my mother-in-law expressed her belief that Katie didn't deserve such turmoil on her wedding day. However, I couldn't help but question whether I deserved this profound betrayal. It appeared that my mother-in-law's concern was primarily directed towards her spoiled daughters, leaving me feeling unsupported and hurt. In the face of the tumultuous situation, my mother-in-law chose not to address Taylor's actions or reprimand her. Instead, she directed her criticism towards me for causing a disturbance on Katie's wedding day. My father-in-law, on the other hand, attempted to diffuse the tension by advising me to calm down, suggesting I drink some water, and assuring me that we could discuss the matter after the event. However, I couldn't help but question what exactly there was left to settle. The revelation of my wife's betrayal had shattered our relationship, and I felt no inclination to endure any further challenges or turmoil from them. As their true colors became evident through their criticism and defense of their cheating daughter, I gained a deeper understanding of their character. Fueled by a mix of anger and frustration, I made my way to the podium and requested a microphone for my speech. With determination, I began to expose the betrayal I had witnessed in the dressing room, presenting the gathered audience with the evidence I had captured. The revelation brought Katie to tears, but rather than sympathize, I sternly instructed her to remain silent. In my speech, I went on to describe how their entire family embodied entitlement and a spoiled nature, shedding light on the underlying dynamics that had contributed to the current situation. I caused quite a stir with my words, leaving people utterly shocked. The revelation of having a romantic involvement with one's cousin, betraying a spouse, and sabotaging one's sister's wedding was truly abhorrent. Being deeply religious, my in-laws found it incredibly challenging to bear the weight of this humiliation. The room was filled with tears as some guests began to depart, unable to handle the situation any longer. At that moment, Katie couldn't contain her emotions any longer and acted out. She approached Taylor and delivered a resounding slap. Felix had already left the event before this happened. Once I exposed my wife's actions, I decided to leave their ill-fated wedding reception. Feeling the need to distance myself from the situation, I made my way back to my city. An update on the situation. I have initiated divorce proceedings and presented my wife with the necessary papers. Despite this, she continues to plead with me to reconcile as her parents hold her responsible for tarnishing their esteemed reputation. Following the wedding day, Taylor and Katie's relationship came to an abrupt end due to Katie's perception that Taylor had ruined her momentous occasion. Felix seemed to have disappeared without a trace, as no one had heard from him since that day. My wife, in an attempt to justify her actions, argues that Katie's behavior on the wedding day caused her immense stress and led to her grievous error. However, such stress does not excuse acts of adultery. I have no desire to welcome this dysfunctional family back into my life, as I simply cannot tolerate their presence any longer. Thank you for listening to the story to the end, and if you like it, please support us with a like as well as subscribe to our channel. Write in the comments. It was a typical Wednesday evening when I returned home from work. The day had been long, and all I wanted was to kick back and relax with Sarah, my wife of 7 years. As I approached the front door, I heard hushed whispers coming from inside. The sound was barely audible, like secrets shared in the dead of night. My heart raced as I cautiously entered the house. The living room light was dim, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The soft murmurs grew louder as I moved closer, making me feel like an intruder in my own home. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The sight that greeted me in the living room stopped me in my tracks. There, on our cozy sofa, sat Sarah. But she wasn't alone. A man I had never seen before was locked in a passionate embrace with her. Their lips were inches apart, their eyes locked in a desperate longing. Time seemed to stand still as I took in the scene, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. They quickly separated, their faces filled with guilt and shock. Sarah's eyes, usually so warm and familiar, were now brimming with tears. The stranger, disheveled and clearly caught off guard, scrambled to gather his belongings. I couldn't speak. My voice had abandoned me, leaving me mute and helpless. Sarah, her cheeks flushed and her hair disarrayed, finally found her words. She stammered, trying to explain herself, but the words seemed to get lost in the air, leaving only the heavy silence between us. The stranger, in a desperate bid to escape this uncomfortable situation, hurriedly made a hasty exit. I watched as he disappeared through the front door, the sound of his hurried footsteps echoing in my ears. Sarah turned to me, her face a portrait of devastation. She began to sob uncontrollably, her tears staining the very couch on which she had betrayed our trust. Her pleas for forgiveness filled the room, a cacophony of remorse and desperation. I demanded to know who the man was and how long this had been going on. My voice, previously lost, had returned with a vengeance. Anger and confusion surged within me, pushing me to seek answers to the questions that were tearing my world apart. Sarah confessed that it had been happening for several months. Months. The word hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the countless lies and deceit that had festered beneath the surface of our marriage. The weight of those months crushed me, leaving me breathless and bewildered. As the tears streamed down Sarah's face, I couldn't help but wonder if there were others involved. Was this a one-time mistake, or had she been living a secret life, hidden from my view? The uncertainty gnawed at my soul, adding another layer of complexity to an already tangled web of emotions. In that moment, I faced a choice. A choice between forgiveness and vengeance, between rebuilding and tearing it all down. The future of our marriage hung in the balance, and my heart was torn between love and betrayal. My wife, Sarah, was locked in a passionate embrace with a man I had never seen before. My keys hit the table with a clatter as I stood there, frozen. It was like a scene out of a movie, one I never expected to play out in my own living room. They quickly separated, their faces filled with guilt and shock. Sarah's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. The stranger, disheveled and clearly caught off guard, mumbled something unintelligible and began gathering his scattered belongings. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer, and a million thoughts raced through my mind. Who was this guy? And what the hell was he doing here with my wife? Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she stammered to explain herself. Her voice quivered, barely audible over the ringing in my ears. I can explain, she managed to choke out, but her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. The stranger, in a desperate bid to escape this uncomfortable situation, hurriedly made a hasty exit. I watched him, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. He slinked out the door, and I knew that this was far from over. Turning my gaze back to Sarah, my voice trembled with a mixture of anger and sadness. Explain. Explain what, Sarah? I demanded, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Who is he, and how long has this been going on? Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she struggled to find the right words. It's complicated, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, just let me explain. I felt a tumultuous mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with tension. Sarah's explanations were a jumbled mess of half-truths and excuses. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling neglected, but her words couldn't justify what I had just witnessed. The man's presence in our home was a stark reminder that our marriage was far from perfect. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah's tears continued to fall, and my anger began to ebb, replaced by a deep sadness. It was clear that we were both victims of our own failures, our own inability to communicate and connect. But in that moment, with the stranger's presence still lingering in the air, forgiveness seemed like an impossible choice. Our marriage had been shaken to its core, and the path forward was uncertain. Hey there, if you're enjoying this content, please consider giving it a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button below. Your support helps us create more great videos like this one. Don't forget to also click the notification bell so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for watching. Sarah began to sob uncontrollably, her tears falling like a torrential rain. I stood there, watching her crumble, unable to ignore the raw pain in her eyes. But I needed answers, and they wouldn't come through her tears alone. I need to know, Sarah, I said, my voice firm. Who is he, and how long has this been going on? Her sobs continued, but she finally managed to speak between gasps for air. His name is David, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And it's been happening for several months. My mind raced with questions about how I could have missed the signs. Sarah and I had been together for 7 years, and I thought I knew her better than anyone else. How had I been so blind to this? How had I failed to see the cracks in our marriage? Anger and betrayal swirled inside me, but beneath it all was a deep sense of hurt. I had trusted Sarah with my heart, and now it felt shattered. I took a step back, needing some distance to process everything. My gaze wandered around the room, landing on the family photos on the wall. There we were, smiling in each one, our love captured in frozen moments. How had it all come to this? Sarah's sobs continued to fill the room, a constant reminder of the pain we were both feeling. I turned back to her, my emotions a jumbled mess. Why, Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. Why did you do this? She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand and tried to explain herself. I felt neglected, she began, her words hesitant. I thought you didn't care anymore, and David was there for me when I needed someone. I couldn't deny that our marriage had been strained lately. Work, stress, and the daily grind had taken their toll on us. But I never imagined it would lead to this. As I looked at Sarah, her mascara-streaked cheeks and red, swollen eyes, I realized that we were both victims of our own failures. We had let our relationship drift, and now we were paying the price. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of our shattered trust hanging in the air. The road ahead seemed uncertain, filled with anger, pain, and a profound sense of betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder if there were others involved. The thought gnawed at me like a persistent itch. Was David the only one? Or were there more secrets hidden in the shadows of our marriage? The uncertainty clawed at my insides, making it hard to breathe. Sarah's pleas for another chance tugged at my heartstrings. As she stood there, her tear-stained face filled with regret, I couldn't help but remember the years of love and laughter we had shared. Our journey together had been filled with ups and downs, but I never thought it would come to this. "I promise, I'll do anything to make it right," she whispered, her voice fragile, like a delicate glass about to shatter. I decided to ask her to leave for the night so I could think. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but I needed space to clear my head, away from the suffocating atmosphere of our home. Sarah agreed, her eyes filled with resignation and a glimmer of hope. As the door closed behind her, I found myself alone in our once happy home. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint echoes of her pleas for forgiveness. I couldn't escape the weight of the situation, no matter where I turned. I stayed up all night, wrestling with my emotions and doubts. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the scenes from earlier in the evening over and over in my mind. The anger, the betrayal, the heartache, they all swirled together in a maelstrom of confusion. The hours passed like an eternity, and as the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I felt a deep exhaustion wash over me. The decision I faced was one of the most significant in my life, and I couldn't make it lightly. With the new day came a sense of clarity. I knew I couldn't let anger and betrayal define the rest of my life. I needed to confront Sarah, to have an honest conversation about the state of our marriage and whether it could ever be rebuilt. The hours had ticked by, but the dawn brought with it the glimmer of a new beginning, a chance to make sense of the tangled mess our lives had become. It wouldn't be easy, but it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the heaviness in my chest. The sun pierced through the curtains, reminding me that life had to go on, even if it was in disarray. I knew I couldn't simply ignore what had happened the night before. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I began to investigate further, driven by a need for answers. It felt like a detective's job, a role I had never expected to play in my own life. I searched for evidence of her infidelity, my heart pounding with each discovery. Text messages and emails became my trail of breadcrumbs, leading me deeper into a world I never knew existed. The messages were hidden in plain sight, but their contents were a damning revelation. David's name appeared repeatedly, their words filled with a longing that cut me to the core. Each piece of evidence painted a more painful picture of her deception. The truth was uglier than I could have imagined, and the pit in my stomach deepened with every scroll of my phone's screen. I couldn't fathom how long this betrayal had been going on, but the evidence pointed to a history I had been oblivious to. Finally armed with undeniable proof, I couldn't avoid the confrontation any longer. I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I approached, her face a mask of guilt and fear. I laid the evidence in front of her, each message and email a painful reminder of her betrayal. Her eyes welled up with fresh tears as she realized there was no denying it any longer. "Why, Sarah?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sorrow. "How could you do this to us?" She didn't have an answer, at least not one that could erase the pain she had caused. Her silence spoke volumes, and the weight of our shattered trust hung heavy in the air. As the tears streamed down her face, I knew that this confrontation was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Our marriage had been irrevocably changed, and the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges. But one thing was clear, I couldn't turn a blind eye to the truth any longer. Sarah swore that it was a mistake and that she wanted to make amends. Her voice trembled as she pleaded for forgiveness, her eyes locked onto mine as if trying to find a lifeline in my gaze. It was hard to ignore the turmoil in her, the regret for the choices that had brought us to this point. "I messed up, big time," she admitted, her words heavy with guilt. "But I love you, and I want to fix this, whatever it takes." I sat across from her, torn between the love I had for the woman who had been my partner for 7 years and the betrayal I couldn't shake off. The idea of rebuilding our marriage felt like an impossible mountain to climb, but there was still a glimmer of hope buried beneath the wreckage. Friends and family started to learn about our marital crisis. It was hard to keep such a deeply personal matter hidden. News of our troubles spread like wildfire, and soon, our closest confidants were offering their opinions and advice. Some urged me to give her a second chance, emphasizing the years we had invested in our relationship. They believed in forgiveness and the idea that love could conquer all, even the darkest of secrets. Others questioned if I had played a role in her actions. Doubts began to creep in, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had neglected our marriage without realizing it. Had I been too focused on work and other responsibilities? It was a painful self-examination, one that made me question my own shortcomings. The voices of those around me, well-intentioned as they were, only added to the confusion swirling inside my head. I felt like a ship adrift in a storm, and the decision I faced weighed heavily on my shoulders. Sarah's promises to change and make amends tugged at my heartstrings. It was impossible to forget the love we had shared, the memories we had built together. But the wounds were deep, and the scars would be a permanent reminder of the pain we had endured. As the days passed, I grappled with the choice before me, knowing that whatever decision I made would shape the rest of our lives. Our marriage hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of redemption or dissolution. And no matter which path I chose, there would be no going back to the way things were before. I felt torn between my love for Sarah and the betrayal I had endured. It was a battle raging within me, love clashing with the hurt and anger that had taken root. I wanted to believe that our love could conquer all, but the scars ran deep, and I couldn't ignore the pain that had been inflicted. Sarah suggested we attend couples therapy to work through our issues. It was a step she hoped would bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing the life we had built together. I agreed to give therapy a chance, hoping it would save our marriage. The first session was like stepping into the unknown. Our problems laid bare for a stranger to dissect. The therapist's office was a safe haven, a place where we could lay our truths on the table without fear of judgment. The therapist delved into the deep-seated issues in our relationship. With each session, we peeled back the layers of our history, exposing the wounds we had both inflicted and endured. It was uncomfortable, like cleaning out an old, neglected wound, but it was necessary for healing. As the weeks passed, I struggled with trust and insecurity. The therapist's questions often felt like a magnifying glass, highlighting the doubts and fears that had festered within me. Sarah's attempts to rebuild our trust were met with resistance, and I couldn't help but wonder if the damage was irreversible. The ultimate decision of whether to forgive and rebuild or end the marriage weighed heavily on my mind. Therapy had brought us closer in some ways, but it had also unearthed uncomfortable truths. The love I felt for Sarah still existed, but it was tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. In the end, the therapist's office became a battleground of emotions. Forgiveness seemed like an elusive goal, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. The decision loomed over us, a storm on the horizon, and I couldn't help but wonder if our love could weather the tempest or if it would be swept away by the winds of change. In the end, it all came down to one pivotal moment, a moment of reckoning that would define the course of our future. The weight of the therapist's words hung in the air as we sat in the small, dimly lit office. Forgiveness, the therapist said, is a choice. It's not about forgetting or condoning the past, but deciding if the love and the history you share are worth the effort to rebuild. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of us acutely aware that this was the crossroads we had been hurtling toward. The therapist's words echoed in our minds as we considered the path ahead. The weeks of therapy had been a roller coaster of emotions, forcing us to confront our deepest insecurities and wounds. We had unearthed the root causes of our issues, but the scars of betrayal still lingered. Trust, once shattered, was like a fragile vase glued back together. It might hold, but the cracks would always be visible. Sarah's remorse had been palpable, her efforts to make amends sincere. The love we had shared for so long hadn't vanished, but it had been shaken to its core. The decision weighed on me like a boulder, and it was time to either lift it together or let it crush what remained of our marriage. "I want to try," Sarah said, her voice unwavering as she looked into my eyes. "I want to rebuild what we had, even if it takes a lifetime." The sincerity in her words cut through the doubts that had clouded my judgment. Maybe, just maybe, we could emerge from this crucible stronger than before. I nodded, my own resolve firming. "I want to try too," I admitted, my voice laced with vulnerability. "But know that it won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight." The therapist offered a reassuring smile, a beacon of hope in the storm. "It's a journey, not a destination," she said. "But with commitment, effort, and time, love can overcome even the most daunting of obstacles." As we left the therapist's office that day, we held each other's hands, our fingers interlocked with a promise of a fresh start. The future remained uncertain, and the scars would always remind us of the pain we had endured, but love had the power to heal, to rebuild, and to mend what had been broken. Our journey had just begun, and as we faced the horizon, we did so with hope and determination. The ultimate decision had been made: forgiveness and a second chance, But only time would reveal if our love could indeed weather the tempest and emerge. Hey there, I'm Mark, just your regular guy who happens to dabble in software engineering. My life was pretty standard, until that one week turned everything upside down. So, let me take you back to when it all started. I was out in Europe for this big tech seminar, the kind that has you wearing name tags and pretending to understand accents from 6 different countries. It was supposed to be this week-long affair, but, as luck would have it, things wrapped up a day early. Most folks would be bummed about losing a day in Europe, but me? All I could think about was getting back to Linda, my wife. We've been hitched for 15 years, and she's one of those school teachers that kids and parents love, a real gem. I'm standing there at the seminar, and my boss, this no-nonsense guy who rarely cracks a smile, comes up and says, "Great job, Mark. You can head home early if you want." I'm thinking, heck yeah, I'm getting out of here. But here's the catch. I didn't tell Linda. I thought, why not surprise her? You see, we're that couple who still tries to keep things exciting. Surprise dates, impromptu road trips, the whole shebang. So, there I am, hustling through the airport, trying to catch an earlier flight. But, of course, it couldn't be that easy. My usual airport is an hour north of our cozy little suburban home, but I end up finding a flight to this smaller airport, almost 2 hours to the south. Never used it before, but hey, adventure, right? I get on the flight, it's cramped. My knees are hugging my chest, and the guy next to me is snoring like a bear. But I'm buzzing with excitement, thinking about Linda's face when she sees me. I land, grab a rental car, one of those tiny things that you pray doesn't fall apart on the highway, and start my midnight road trip back home. Now, picture this. I'm pulling into our driveway, it's just shy of midnight, and the street's quiet, like one of those scenes from a movie where you know something's about to happen. But the house? It's dark, pitch black, and Linda's car? Nowhere in sight. My heart's doing this funny little dance in my chest, not the good kind. I'm lugging my suitcase inside, trying to make sense of it. Where could she be at this hour, right? I'm not one to jump to conclusions, so I fish out my phone and dial her number. It rings, and finally, she picks up on the third ring. Her voice is groggy, like I just woke her up. "Hey hun, just checking in. Everything okay?" I ask, trying to sound casual. She's all, "Yeah, it's past midnight. I was sleeping. See you at the airport tomorrow morning, right?" Now, I'm standing there, phone in hand, feeling like I've just walked into a weird movie. I'm like, sleeping, but not at home. I play it cool, though. Yeah, see you tomorrow, I stay, and we hang up. But get this. I call our home phone, and guess what? It rings just fine. So, the whole, phone's broken, story? Not adding up. I'm not Sherlock Holmes or anything, but something's fishy. So, I start doing the only logical thing. I search the house. Under the bed, in the closets, the usual hiding spots. But nope, no Linda, no nothing. Just me and a whole lot of silence. So, there I am, sitting in our dark living room, thinking, what now, Mark? I've always considered myself a pretty sharp guy, not easily fooled. But right then, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was missing a huge piece of the puzzle. And that, my friends, is where it all began. Little did I know, that night was just the opening act of a show I never bought tickets for. Alright, so where did I leave off? Oh yeah, sitting in my dark living room, feeling like the lead in a mystery movie I never auditioned for. So, I decide it's time for some good old-fashioned detective work. And by detective work, I mean sitting on the couch, trying to piece together the puzzle with a bag of stale potato chips. It's getting late, or early, depending on how you look at it, and I'm just about ready to call it a night when I spot something on the kitchen table. It's a receipt from some fancy hotel downtown, dated for that very night. Now, I'm no genius, but I know Linda wouldn't be at a hotel for a school project. My mind's racing with possibilities, none of them good. But I needed to know, So, I do what any reasonable person would do at 1 a.m. I drive to the hotel. I'm half hoping I'm wrong, that there's a perfectly logical explanation for all this. I get to the hotel, and it's one of those places with a shiny lobby and a doorman who looks at you like you're lost. I wander in, trying to blend in with the late-night crowd. And there, in the corner of the lobby lounge, is Linda. But she's not alone. She's laughing and chatting with some guy I've never seen before. He's got that. I spend more time in the gym than at work. Look. Now, I'm standing there, feeling like I've been sucker punched. I duck behind a potted plant. Classic spy move, right? And listen in. And let me tell you, the things I heard. It's like listening to a soap opera, but worse, because it's your life. They're talking about sneaking away for weekend trips, secret messages, the whole 9 yards. My head's spinning, and I'm trying to process it all. It's like one of those moments when you realize the quiet life you thought you had is anything but. I could have walked up to them, made a scene, but I didn't. I had a different plan brewing. I sneak out of the hotel and drive back home, my mind working overtime. By the time I get back, it's almost dawn, and I've got it. A plan to bring this whole charade out into the open. So, there I was, back at home, reeling from what I'd just seen at the hotel. Linda, my Linda, laughing it up with some mystery guy. Felt like a gut punch, you know? But I wasn't about to let this slide without digging deeper. No way. The next day, instead of confronting her or blowing up her phone, I play it cool. I call her up and spin a tale. Hey hun, looks like this seminar's going into overtime. Won't be back till next week. She sounds relieved, says she'll miss me, but I can hear that edge in her voice, the one that says she's got other plans. I start tailing her, keeping it low key. Sounds crazy, right? But I had to know the full story. Turns out, Linda's got a whole routine. Fancy dinners, late nights, the works. And always with Mr. Muscles, as I've started calling him in my head. Each day, I'm piecing together more of the puzzle. They're not just flings or one-time things. This is serious. They're talking about future plans, sneaking away for weekends, even joking about a life together. It's like watching someone else's life fall apart, except it's mine. And the more I find out, the angrier I get. But anger's like a fire, right? Gotta channel it right, or it burns everything down. So, I hatch a plan. A plan to expose this whole charade for what it is, a sham. I don't call our friends or family, not yet. First, I need solid proof, something undeniable. I'm talking photos, receipts, the kind of evidence you see in courtroom dramas. It's meticulous work, tracking their movements, snapping pics without being seen. I feel like a character in a spy novel, only the stakes are my marriage. So there I am. Mark the makeshift detective, tailing Linda and her gym buddy-turned-lover, whom I've dubbed Mr. Muscles in my head. Each day, I'm gathering bits and pieces, snapshots of their secret world. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, except every piece is a stab in the heart. During my sleuthing, I stumble upon something, or rather, someone interesting. Mr. Muscles has a wife. Yeah, plot thickens, right? She's this elegant woman, living in the suburbs, probably unaware her husband is playing Casanova in the city. Now, I'm thinking, Mark, you've got to meet this lady. But how? I can't just knock on her door and say, hey, our spouses are having an affair. So, I cook up a plan. I find out where she works, a local art gallery, and plan A, chance, encounter. I walk in one afternoon, pretending to be an art enthusiast. There she is, graceful, maybe a bit lonely. We strike up a conversation about some abstract painting. I'm nodding and smiling, not understanding a thing about it. We get to talking, and I gently steer the conversation towards personal life. She mentions her husband, how he's often away for business. My inside screaming, if only you knew, lady. I keep visiting the gallery, building a rapport with her. Then, one day, I drop the bomb. I think our spouses might be more than just colleagues, I say, showing her a photo of Linda and Mr. Muscles a bit too cozy at a cafe. She's shocked, devastated. I can see the realization dawning on her, the pieces falling into place in her mind. But she's strong, you know, doesn't crumble. Instead, she asks, what do we do now? That's when I lay out my plan. Let's expose them, but in a way they'd never see coming, I suggest. She's hesitant at first, but then there's this fire in her eyes. She's in. So, there I am, with all this evidence of Linda's infidelity, feeling like my whole world's flipped upside down. But I'm not about to let this slide without making a statement, a big one. I start plotting a grand reveal, something that'll show everyone the truth about Linda and Mr. Muscles. I decide to throw a surprise gathering at our house, the place where they often meet up, thinking they're safe in our little love nest. I call up our friends, family, even some of Linda's colleagues. Tell them we're throwing an impromptu party to celebrate an unexpected business success of mine. Everyone's excited, praising me for my hard work, completely unaware of the real drama about to unfold. The plan's simple. Have everyone hide in the living room, lights off, waiting for Linda and Mr. Muscles to walk into their not-so-secret rendezvous. Then, bam, lights on, and the truth's out for all to see. The day arrives, and our house is buzzing with whispered anticipation. Friends and family are tucked away, some hiding behind furniture, others in adjoining rooms, all waiting for the big moment. Linda and Mr. Muscles, clueless about the setup, stroll in, lost in their own little world. They're laughing, touching, starting to get real cozy, thinking they're alone. I'm watching from my hiding spot, heart pounding, waiting for the perfect moment. And then, when they're just about to cross a line they can't come back from, I hit the lights. The room erupts in gasps and murmurs. Linda and Mr. Muscles freeze like deer in headlights. The look of shock, embarrassment, guilt, it's all there, painted across their faces. Our friends and family are in utter disbelief. Some are shaking their heads, others looking away, unable to believe what they're seeing. Linda's sister, who's always been her champion, looks like she's about to cry. My best friend, who's known us since college, just stares, his expression a mix of anger and pity. Linda's colleagues, who've always seen her as the perfect professional, are whispering among themselves, their respect for her visibly crumbling. And there, in the midst of it all, is Linda's mother, her face a picture of shock and disappointment. As for Mr. Muscles, he's stammering, trying to make sense of the situation. But there's no talking his way out of this one. His eyes dart around the room, looking for an escape, but there's none to be found. Linda's trying to speak, to explain, but her words are lost in the chaos of the moment. The truth's out, and there's no hiding from it now. The facade of the perfect marriage, the ideal life, it's all come crashing down in the most public way possible. The aftermath is a blur. Some guests leave, unable to handle the tension. Others stay, offering me their support, their expressions a mix of sympathy and disbelief. Linda's left standing there, her secret life exposed, her world shattered just as much as mine. And me? I'm feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Relief that the truth's finally out, anger at the betrayal, sadness at what's been lost. But above all, there's a sense of closure. The lies are over, and now, it's time to start picking up the pieces. The room's still echoing with the last traces of the night's drama. There I am, standing in the wreckage of what used to be my life, surrounded by the stunned faces of friends and family. Linda's standing there, looking like she's been hit by a freight train. Mr. Muscles, well, he's already slinked out the door, tail between his legs. The air's thick with tension, unspoken questions hanging like heavy clouds. Linda's sister, Karen, is the first to break the silence. She's always been the peacemaker, the one who tries to find the good in everyone. But even she can't mask her disappointment. Linda, how could you? She whispers, more in sorrow than in anger. Linda's colleagues, some of them close friends of ours for years, shuffle uncomfortably. I can see the respect they once had for her dissolving in front of my eyes. It's one thing to hear rumors, it's another to see the truth laid bare in your living room. Then there's Linda's mother, a stern woman who's always valued family above all else. The look she gives Linda is one I can't quite decipher. It's a mix of anger, heartbreak, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of understanding. But she doesn't say a word. She doesn't have to. As the night wears on, the guests begin to leave, offering me sympathetic pats on the back and awkward, mournful looks. I'm left alone with Linda in the deafening silence. She tries to speak, to explain, but what's there to say? The trust is broken, the damage done. Finally, she says something that catches me off guard. I never meant to hurt you, Mark. I lost my way. Her voice is a silence like a knife. I want to be angry, to shout and rage at her. But all I feel is a profound sadness, a sense of loss so deep it's almost physical. I know, I reply, and it's the truth. I do know. People don't just wake up one day and decide to wreck their lives. It happens bit by bit, choice by choice. And maybe, in some way, I played a part in it too. The house feels empty as the last guest leaves. It's just Linda and me, standing amidst the ruins of our marriage. We talk, not about us, but about practical things, living arrangements, finances, how we'll explain this to our friends and family. As dawn breaks, Linda packs a bag and leaves. I watch her drive away, and there's a moment where I almost call out to her, ask her to stay and work it out. But some things, once broken, can't be fixed. And maybe, just maybe, it's better this way. In the silence of the morning, I sit down with a cup of coffee, staring at the mess in the living room, the remnants of the party that wasn't really a party. And I realize that this is it, the first day of the rest of my life. It's a daunting thought, starting over. But there's also a sense of freedom, a chance to rebuild, to find out who I am when I'm not part of Mark and Linda. It's not going to be easy, but then again, the best things in life rarely are. So, with the morning sun streaming through the window, I make a promise to myself to learn from this, to grow, and to never lose sight of who I am again. Because in the end, that's all we really have, ourselves, our choices, and the paths we choose to walk. The days following the party-turned revelation are a blur of emotions and decisions. The house, once filled with love and laughter, now echoes with the silence of absence. I go through the motions, dealing with the fallout, answering calls from concerned friends and family, but inside, I'm numb. But life, as it tends to do, keeps moving. I return to work, throwing myself into projects and meetings, anything to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues, aware of the situation, offer a mix of sympathy and space. It's appreciated, but there's this unspoken understanding that the Mark and Linda they knew is no more. In the quiet of the evenings, I find myself reflecting on everything. How did we get here? Were there signs I missed? Could I have done something differently? It's a dangerous spiral, and I have to constantly remind myself not to get sucked into the abyss of what-ifs. A couple of weeks later, I get a call from Karen, Linda's sister. She's been caught in the middle of this, trying to support Linda while also understanding my pain. We meet for coffee, a neutral ground to talk. Karen looks tired, worn down by the family drama. She's struggling. Mark, Karen says softly, stirring her coffee. Not that it excuses anything, but she's lost too. I nod, understanding. Despite everything, I can't help but feel a pang of concern for Linda. I hope she finds what she's looking for, I reply, and I mean it. Karen gives me a small, sad smile. And you, Mark, what are you looking for now? Her question catches me off guard. What am I looking for? Redemption? Closure? A new beginning? I'm not sure. All I know is that I can't stay anchored to the past. The conversation with Karen is a turning point. It makes me realize that holding on to anger and resentment won't change what happened. It's time to let go, not for Linda, but for me. I start to make changes, small at first. Rearranging the furniture, taking down some old photos, creating a space that feels more like mine and less like ours. It's therapeutic in a way, a physical manifestation of the internal changes I'm going through. I reconnect with old friends, some of whom I'd lost touch with over the years. We meet for drinks, catch up on life, and their company reminds me of who I was before Linda. It's like rediscovering parts of myself that I had forgotten. One evening, I find myself at a local community center, signing up for a cooking class. It's something I've always wanted to do but never got around to. Surrounded by strangers, all there for different reasons, I feel a sense of camaraderie. We're all here, trying to learn something new, to add a little flavor to our lives. As the weeks turn into months, the raw pain of the betrayal fades into a dull ache. It's still there, a part of my story, but it no longer defines me. I'm finding joy in small things. A well-cooked meal, a night out with friends, a quiet evening with a good book. And then, there's Sarah, Mr. Muscle's wife. We've kept in touch, two people bound by a shared experience of betrayal. There's a comfort in our interactions, an understanding that doesn't need words. We meet occasionally for coffee, offering each other support and a listening ear. One evening, as we're laughing over a shared joke, I realize how much I've come to value her company. She's smart, funny, and resilient. There's a connection there, something that goes beyond our shared pain. But I'm cautious, aware that both of us are still healing. As the year comes to a close, I find myself reflecting on the journey I've been on. It's been a road marked by pain, discovery, and growth. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, and that's okay. I've learned that life is unpredictable, but it's also full of possibilities. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to face it. With each passing day, I'm building a new life, one that's authentically mine. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what comes next. If you liked what you've read and want to stay updated on more stories, insights, or just life reflections, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you're there and interested. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. That way, you won't miss out on any new chapters in this ever-evolving story of life, love, and learning. Trust me, there's a lot more to come, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey. So, like, subscribe, and join me as we navigate the twists and turns of this adventure called life. Thanks for being here, and I can't wait. All this time I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me, and it was not the first time. I realized that all along she had her own plan, and I was just a puppet in her hands. But I wasn't going to stay idle, and decided to get back at her for her betrayal. Matvey and Alina had known each other since high school. The boy had been in love with the first beauty of their school for many years, and once even worked up the courage to ask her out. But she sharply rejected him. She preferred to go out with a cocky high school student named Pasha. He seemed mature and very cool to her. Matvey sometimes heard other girls whispering behind his back, discussing his unrequited love. And Alina herself was with Pavel right up until graduation. After graduation, Matvey studied at university working in parallel, and after graduation began to rise by leaps and bounds on the career ladder. He managed to get a job at an international company. He began to earn a lot of money. He bought himself a spacious apartment and a nice car and helped his parents. He also liked to travel. The impressions of travel greatly energized him. One day, he was invited to another meeting of classmates. Matvey decided to go there for a change. It was there that his meeting with Alina took place many years later. When she saw Matvey, she could not even believe her eyes. The man, though clothed, was restrained, but she roughly understood the cost of all these things on him. They were talking. Alina questioned her former suitor with great interest about what he was living now. And by the minute she was getting more and more into some kind of relationship with him. They exchanged phone numbers, and the next day Alina was the first to call. Now after all these years, she herself made a date with Matvey. Over all these years, he had not lost his warm feelings for Alina. And although in the past she had rejected him and dated someone else, none of that mattered. Now they met as adults. And Matvey was glad that Alina was finally interested in him herself. Their relationship began very quickly. Alina knew what she wanted from this life. So the slow development of the novel did not interest her. Their wedding took place just 6 months later. Although Matvey's parents tried to tell him it was too soon, and it was still necessary to get to know each other better, they began to travel together. Matvey showed his wife various countries in their local colors. Alina watched everything with her mouth open and was as excited as a child. When they returned to their city, the woman began to take more and more of her work from Hula, explaining that she was not feeling well. At the same time, she often began to complain to her husband that she was very tired of working. Her bosses didn't appreciate her, and she felt that she was wasting her time there. These were no longer subtle hints, but real manipulations. And Matvey fell for it. He still could not rejoice that the love of his youth, now his lawful spouse. Of course, after all this talk, he himself suggested that she quit her job and rest at home. He would take care of everything. Alina's dream finally came true. She lives in her husband's luxurious apartment. He allows her not to work and does not deny her anything. They live like this for a few more years. And then her husband's business trip, which lasted several weeks, happened. He and his wife would call each other late at night, but sometimes she would miss a call, claiming that she was very tired from the day. When Matvey returned, it was as if the atmosphere in his home had changed. His wife did not welcome him with the same joy as usual. She acted rather reserved and even a little aloof, which really hurt the man. He thought she had something going on or was just in a bad mood, so he didn't emphasize it. Intuitively, he sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't give it much thought. During the next month that he was in town, his wife's being just as slightly different. She started spending more and more time with her girlfriends, sometimes returning home and even later than her husband. When Matvey asked her what she was doing all that time away from home, she said that her best friend was also out of work now, and they went to salons and sports centers together or just went for a walk. One day, Matvey was supposed to have a business meeting at a restaurant in the center of town. On that day, things did not go well from the very morning. First, he left important documents at home, and on his way back to pick them up, he was late for work. Then some minor mishaps at the office threw him off balance. And now he was stuck in a traffic jam not far from that very restaurant. As he sat in his car, irritably texting his colleague that he might be late because of the traffic situation, his attention was caught by two silhouettes gliding outside the window. Matvey looked up and saw a couple. His wife was walking with some man and was hanging out with him interestedly. The husband's previously unknown feeling of jealousy pricked him. He could see for sure that it was his wife, and how she was enjoying herself in the company of another man. Interesting choice of girlfriends she has, of course, he thought irritatedly. The traffic was moving very slowly, and Matvey decided to follow where the two men were going. They were going straight to the restaurant where Matvey himself was headed. After about 10 minutes, all the cars parted, and the man was able to turn around and park beside the place. He went in very carefully, looking around to see where his wife was sitting, but at the same time not to get caught. He was lucky. The table at which his meeting was taking place was at a decent distance from the table where Alina was sitting with her companion. While this colleague was talking to his partners, Matvey was watching his wife without blinking. At last he could make out who she was with. The face seemed painfully familiar, but the man had to strain his memory hard to figure out who it was. With horror to himself, he recognized in her companion, Paul, the same one Alina had dated back in high school. With each passing minute, his faith in the best was evaporating faster and faster. Alina openly flirted with Pasha, and at one point he began stroking her thigh. Matvey desperately wanted to take out the anger that was boiling inside of him on these two, but he was held hostage to the situation. The meeting was very important. He could not lose face. As a result, the man thought, since these two were acting this way, their relationship had not lasted the first day. Yes, he was hurt because of this infidelity. He was ready to tear up and throw up. But he understood that these emotions would not make things better. He could deal with the unfaithful spouse later, but now he had better things to do. He concentrated on the negotiations and held them to the highest standard. Alina and her lover left before he did. It was obvious they were in a hurry to finally get some privacy. Afterwards, Matvey drove home. He threw all of Alina's belongings into bags and took them to the nearest garbage can. When the traitor returned home, she was extremely surprised. The door was locked from the inside with a latch. Then her husband opened it. He said that now she no longer lived here, and if she had time, she could still fight the local bums at the dump for her clothes. The woman first thought her husband was joking, but when the door slammed in her face, she realized that he had found out. The couple divorced. Matvey was even glad that his mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. It turned out to be very convenient. Alina never once apologized to Matvey for her betrayal. Nothing bad happened for her. She simply acted out of self-interest. For a long time after school, she was constantly on and off with Pavel because he could not provide her with everything. But when she found out that Pavel's financial situation had improved, she was the first to make contact. In fact, he was the only one she really loved. But his plight a few years ago prevented her from staying with him. She met Matthew and realized that he could give her the life she wanted. Now she began to live with Pavel again. Matvey understood that Alina would forever be the one who would be constantly on the lookout for a better place. She would change her partners an endless number of times without sticking with anyone for long. Instead of building a future with her husband, helping him and reaching for the heights together, she has chosen to live a parasitic lifestyle. But life is complicated, and staying on the crest of success all the time won't work. Black bars happen to everyone. So the claim that Paul was lucky to stay with such a woman together was highly questionable. She would stay with him, but only until his first bad luck. Second story. I might never have known the truth about my wife. But when my friend suddenly showed up with the words, "I need to tell you something about your wife," I felt something was wrong. I couldn't even think what he was going to say. But what followed was so amazing that I didn't know what to do next. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me for months, and my friend had known about it all along. He told me everything he knew, and I decided to take justice into my own hands. I got my revenge on her for cheating. In this video, I will tell you the whole story, and you will learn how I found out the truth about my wife, and how I decided to get revenge on her. Ruslan and Sophia had been married for 6 years. Sonia was a manicurist, and Ruslan worked for a small company as a landscape designer. A couple of years ago, they took an apartment on a mortgage, and were gradually fixing it up. The couple had been trying for over a year to have a child. Both were ready to take on the role of parents, but nothing worked. Even though they had already had some tests done, and everything was normal, they did not want to take any drastic steps. So they just kept hoping that someday they would finally get lucky. Ruslan had a good friend whose name was Andrew. The man, unlike his companion, was lonely and lived alone. He did not have much luck in relationships. At some point, he had already accepted this state of affairs and stopped busting his neck to get acquainted with anyone. He was comfortable enough as it was. They had met in high school and had been in touch ever since. As adults, they didn't see each other that often. But when they did meet, it was as if they hadn't been together all that time. One afternoon, Andrew was going about his business and decided to walk through the park. His head was occupied with the repairs he was making, so he hardly paid any attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over some rock in the middle of the path, and it snapped him out of his heap of thoughts. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed his fall, when suddenly, he spotted a familiar silhouette ahead. He stepped a little closer and recognized her. It was Sophia, his friend's wife. She was walking in the company of a man. "Sonia, hello," shouted Andrew, walking a little closer. The woman turned around. "Andrew, hello? I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already held out his hand to her companion to say hello.
André Kostia.
At that moment, the woman tensed a little. She bit her lip and then said with a laugh, "This is my brother. He came to town for the day, here to give us a tour. We're really in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Andrew replied that it was no big deal. He asked him to say hello to Ruslan, and then they said goodbye. He stared intently at Konstantine's face. Something tensed him in the whole situation. It was either Sanja's reaction or her hurry. For a second, he even thought there was far from a kinship between these two. But the telephone call from a client distracted him, pushing the man's doubts away. In the flow of events and working moments, Andrew had completely forgotten about the situation in the park. He was not even surprised at the absence of a call from Ruslan. Usually, if he said hello to him through his acquaintances, he considered it his duty to call and meet him. But the friend did not show up until a few months later. One evening, Ruslan dialed his comrade and informed him in a joyful voice that soon he would finally become a father. You know, nothing much had happened before that. And here is the real news, and I decided to share it with you. Andrew sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long he and his wife had come to this. At the end of the year, in the winter, Ruslan even invited him to the maternity hospital to be discharged. Afterward, they sat together for a while and celebrated. Later, there was a lull. The couple fully immersed themselves in taking care of the baby. The world began to revolve around him. From time to time, they would write to each other. But for the most part, Ruslan was immersed in his work to provide his family with everything they needed. They had not seen each other for over a year. And one day on his day off, Andrew was passing through the neighborhood where his comrade lived. He had to pick up an order at the pickup point, which was in their house. And by happy coincidence, he met Ruslan in the street. He was strolling along with the stroller. Andre shouted at him, and he gestured for him to keep his voice down. The child dozed off. It turned out that his wife had sent him for a walk with his son and wanted to relax and unwind. The friends were talking. Andrew looked at the little boy and asked if he could tell what the child looked like. He looked more like his mother. He didn't take anything from me as if he didn't like it, apparently. He made a joke. My friend did not appreciate the joke. He suddenly remembered seeing his wife with some stranger whom she introduced as her brother. And this was not long before the news of the pregnancy. I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but have you ever considered that the baby might not be yours? Andre asked seriously. Ruslan looked at him like he was crazy. He laughed and asked why he suddenly thought so. A friend snapped and decided to tell him that he had seen his wife with someone in the park at the time. After that, Ruslan was not so cheerful anymore. Well, hello. She certainly didn't tell me from you. She didn't say that she saw you at all. And your brother? Kostya, you say? She doesn't have any brothers, and I don't remember any cousins. He said thoughtfully. And she certainly did not tell me that any of her relatives visited her at that time. This news shook Ruslan. He still felt euphoric that he finally had his heir. Besides, he had always found that he and his wife had a good relationship, but now doubts about his wife's faithfulness had settled in his mind. Yes, and at a time when they were ready to give up, and she suddenly became pregnant. At that time, Ruslan thought it was a miracle, but now everything was covered with a shroud of doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even though it was so much later. That night, he had waited for his wife's return more anxiously than ever before. He knew there was a serious talk to be had. As he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he went over in his head all the suspicious things that he might in the past have simply turned a blind eye to. When their next attempt to have a baby failed, he felt at one point as if his wife had grown cold to the idea altogether. She didn't say she'd changed her mind, but you could feel it in the look on her face. Then there was even some coldness between them. But Ruslan put it down to hormonal background. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and find out from the source whether there was a certain Constantine among his wife's brothers after all. He veiled this strange question by saying that a certain man came to their house when Sonia was away and introduced himself as her brother. Our fears had already been confirmed. There was no such man among her cousins, or even third cousins. When the man hung up, Sonia had just returned home. After she had checked on the baby, the man decided to start a conversation. He began from afar, mentioning Kostya, who had recently dropped in on her as if to visit. Ruslan decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Sonia did not make eye contact. She constantly looked away. When the man's name came up, it was as if she tensed up. But she tried not to show it. Do you know him, dear? Her husband asked in a calm tone. Yes, he's a former colleague. And what did he want? Pronounced Sonia. He wanted to see his child. The husband decided to go along with the provocation. Sonia went dramatically pale and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on dry land. Ruslan decided to squeeze her. So he's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat with him, did you? It seems time to do a paternity test. His words thundered to his wife. Then she tried to pull herself together. I've been agonizing for hours to give you a son, and you're doing this to me. She howled. Well, if it really is my baby, what do you have to worry about? Her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she were ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping baby, she started yelling at her husband for trying to avoid responsibility for the baby like a coward. She threatened that now she would go to her mother and Ruslan would never see her again. Then she tearfully began packing her belongings. The expertise made it clear that the baby was not Ruslan after all. After that, he and Sonia scandalously divorced. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already managed to get used to the role of the father, attached to this little lump of happiness. All this time, Andra had been by Ruslan's side and supported him in this difficult period. Sonia went to her parents. By then, she had long been out of touch with her lover. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Kostya himself was not eager to do so. He already had his own family and he did not care about Sonia. So, in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation in the